It was a scorching afternoon, and the line outside the fancy restaurant stretched down the sidewalk. People found themselves hoping for a table, but no one seemed more desperate than the pregnant woman in the bright yellow dress. She shifted uncomfortably, one hand resting on her belly, the other wiping sweat from her forehead. She had been standing there for what felt like forever, waiting for a table, her patience wearing thin. Inside, a young hostess adjusted her name tag and smoothed out her apron. She had seen the woman outside and knew she had been waiting, but the restaurant was busy. Reservations came first, and walk-ins had to wait their turn. That was just how it worked. Besides, the woman hadn't exactly been polite when she asked for a table earlier. The hostess had seen entitled customers before, people who thought they deserved special treatment just because they demanded it. This felt no different. But what the hostess didn't know was that this wasn't just any customer. The woman outside, shifting from foot to foot in the heat, was married to someone very important, someone who could change everything in an instant. Just then, the heavy restaurant doors swung open, and a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped outside. His presence commanded attention. The moment his eyes landed on the pregnant woman, his expression darkened. He knew exactly who she was, and he knew exactly what had happened. The hostess, still busy inside, had no idea her world was about to turn upside down. She had no idea that the man who had just stepped outside wasn't just another customer. He was the owner of the entire restaurant, and when he found out how his wife had been treated, there was going to be a reckoning. But by the time the hostess realized what was happening, it was already too late. The man took a slow, deep breath as he walked toward his wife. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the discomfort on her face. She had always been strong, never one to complain easily. If she was this upset, something had to be seriously wrong. Meanwhile, the hostess inside was still managing the front, unaware of what was happening just a few steps away. She glanced at the clock, mentally counting down the hours until her shift ended. The restaurant was packed, and she had been doing her best to keep everything running smoothly. Some customers had been understanding about the wait times, while others had been impatient, but that was just part of the job. Back outside, the pregnant woman sighed, shifting her weight again. The heat was unbearable, and she could feel her energy draining. She had tried to explain her situation earlier, even asked politely for a place to sit while she waited, but the hostess had barely looked up, dismissing her request with a quick, "Sorry, we're full." She hadn't expected special treatment, just basic kindness. Her husband reached her side and gently placed a hand on her back. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. "Too long," she murmured. "She wouldn't even let me sit inside." His jaw tightened. He had built this restaurant from the ground up, pouring his heart into every detail, training his staff to treat every guest with warmth and respect. And yet, his own wife had been turned away, left outside in the heat like she didn't matter. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the entrance. The hostess, still busy seating other guests, didn't notice him at first. But when she did, her heart skipped a beat. She recognized him immediately. The owner, her boss. Something in his expression made her stomach drop. She didn't know what she had done wrong yet, but she had a terrible feeling she was about to find out. The hostess swallowed hard as the owner stepped inside. His presence alone changed the energy in the room. A few servers glanced his way, sensing something was off, but they kept moving, carrying trays and refilling drinks. The restaurant buzzed with conversation, unaware of the storm brewing at the front. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he scanned the room, his sharp eyes settling on the empty waiting chairs inside, the same ones his wife could have been sitting in. His jaw tightened. He had hired this staff personally, trained them to value every customer, to treat them with kindness. Yet here was his wife, ignored, left outside in the heat. The hostess forced a smile, her voice careful. "Good evening, sir. I didn't realize you were coming in tonight." He didn't return the smile. "Apparently, you didn't realize a lot of things." His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, Like the fact that my pregnant wife has been standing outside for hours. The color drained from her face. She quickly looked toward the door, as if seeing the woman for the first time. I didn't know she was. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. His words cut through the air like a blade. She asked for a place to sit. You turned her away. The hostess stammered, struggling to find the right response. She had been following policy, making sure reservations came first. That was the rule, wasn't it? But now, with her boss standing in front of her, those rules suddenly didn't feel so solid. Meanwhile, outside, the pregnant woman watched through the glass, her emotions mixed. She hadn't wanted to cause a scene. She had only wanted someone to acknowledge her, to show her the basic courtesy they gave every other guest. A few customers nearby had started to notice the tension. The air felt heavier. Something was about to happen. The hostess knew she had to say something. But before she could, the owner spoke again, his voice lower now, controlled but firm. "We treat every guest with respect here," he said. "Or at least I thought we did." And just like that, the entire night shifted. The hostess felt her hands tremble slightly as she clasped them together, trying to maintain her composure. The weight of the owner's stare pressed down on her, and the murmurs from nearby guests only made it worse. She could feel the tension thick in the air, but she couldn't afford to break under it. "I was just following protocol," she finally managed to say, her voice quieter now. "We've been really busy, and I didn't know she was a person." The owner's voice was sharp. Someone who needed just a little bit of kindness. The words stung. She wanted to explain, to justify her actions, but every excuse sounded weak in her own head. She had seen the woman waiting, uncomfortable, exhausted, but she had dismissed it, assuming she was just another impatient guest. Now she realized how wrong she had been. The pregnant woman remained outside, shifting her weight again, watching through the glass. She had always known her husband ran a tight ship, holding his staff to the highest standards. But she had never seen him like this controlled fury, this quiet disappointment. It wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the culture he had built, the values he had instilled in his team, and the fact that someone he trusted had failed to uphold them. A few nearby waiters exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. The restaurant still buzzed with conversation, but more and more eyes were turning toward the front. The moment had taken on a life of its own. The owner took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "What do you think would have happened if this was someone else? If it weren't my wife?" The hostess opened her mouth, but no words came out. She already knew the answer. This wasn't about titles or connections. It was about decency, and she had failed at it. For a long moment, no one moved. The air in the restaurant felt thick with unspoken words, unspoken consequences. And then finally, the owner turned, pushing open the door and stepping outside toward his wife. Whatever was coming next, whatever decision he was about to make, everyone inside knew one thing for sure. Nothing was going to be the same after this. As the owner stepped outside, the heat hit him immediately, but it wasn't nearly as heavy as the weight in his chest. His wife looked up at him, her eyes filled with exhaustion and something else, something deeper. He expected frustration, maybe relief that he had stepped in, but instead, there was hesitation. "I just wanted to sit down," she said softly, her voice laced with disappointment. "I wasn't asking for much." Her words stung more than he expected. This wasn't just about bad service anymore. It was about the principle of it all. She hadn't wanted special treatment. She had only wanted to be treated like a human being. And somehow, in the restaurant he had built, that basic kindness had been denied to her. Before he could respond, the door behind them creaked open again. The hostess had followed, her face still pale. But she wasn't alone. Another staff member, an older waiter with years of experience, stepped outside too, glancing between them, an uneasy look in his eyes. "Sir," the waiter said carefully, "I think you should know something." The owner turned to him, his patience already thin. "What is it?" The waiter hesitated. He knew what he was about to say would change everything. But the truth had to come out. She wasn't just turned away because of the wait list, he admitted. I heard what was said earlier. It wasn't just about being busy. He shot the hostess a quick, unreadable glance before turning back to the owner. She assumed your wife couldn't afford to eat here. Silence. The words hung in the thick air, sinking in slowly, painfully. The owner's expression darkened, his hands clenching at his sides. His wife inhaled sharply, her face unreadable, but he knew what she was thinking. It wasn't just about bad service anymore. It wasn't just about being left in the heat. It was about something much worse. The hostess opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but no excuse would be enough. Not now. The tension that had been simmering finally boiled over. The owner took a step closer, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that true? The hostess looked away, but the damage was already done. And just like that, the situation had escalated into something no one could ignore. The air around them felt heavier than ever. The hostess shifted uncomfortably, her lips parting as if searching for an excuse, but there was none. The owner's piercing gaze held her in place, waiting for an answer she couldn't give. I didn't mean it like that, she finally muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look like... Like what? The owner cut in, his voice dangerously calm. Like someone who belonged here? The hostess dropped her gaze, her silence confirming everything. The weight of her mistake finally hit her. She had judged the woman standing before her without knowing anything about her. Not her name, not her story, nothing. And now she had to face the consequences. For a long moment, no one spoke. The restaurant behind them continued its usual rhythm, silverware clinking, low conversations humming, but the energy at the entrance was different. Tense, unforgiving. The owner exhaled, shaking his head. This restaurant was built on respect, on treating every guest like they matter. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable finality to it. If you can't understand that, then you don't belong here. The hostess's eyes widened. Please. But it was too late. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone did. She swallowed hard, her face burning with regret, but there was nothing left to say. Without another word, she turned, walking back inside, past the quiet stares of her co-workers who had witnessed everything. The owner turned back to his wife, the anger in his expression fading, replaced by something softer. Regret. I'm so sorry, he murmured. I never thought this could happen here. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. It's not your fault. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the air, unexpected, hesitant. Excuse me. They turned to see a woman who had been sitting nearby, watching everything unfold. She hesitated before stepping forward. I just wanted to say, thank you, for standing up for her, for standing up for all of us. The owner looked around and realized other guests had been watching, some nodding in quiet agreement. This moment wasn't just about one person, it was bigger than that. And just like that, the night took on a new meaning. A lesson learned, a truth revealed, and nothing in that restaurant would ever be the same again. The owner took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. He looked around, realizing how many people had witnessed what happened. Some nodded in approval, others whispered among themselves, and a few sat in quiet reflection. This wasn't just about his wife anymore, it was about something bigger. A reminder that the way people are treated, even in the smallest moments, matters. The pregnant woman squeezed his hand again, giving him a reassuring look. Let's just go inside, she said softly. I'm starving. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Even after everything, she didn't want to dwell on the anger or embarrassment. She just wanted to move forward. That was the kind of person she was, and he loved her even more for it. As they stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different. The staff stood a little straighter, the guests more aware. The older waiter who had spoken up earlier approached quietly. We've always respected you, sir, he said carefully. But seeing you stand up for her like that, it means a lot to all of us. The owner nodded, appreciating the words, but knowing that one lesson wasn't enough. "This place needs to do better," he admitted. "It starts with me, but it includes all of us." The waiter nodded in agreement. "We'll make sure it does." A few minutes later, they were finally seated. The hostess's absence was noticeable, but the restaurant carried on. Orders were taken, conversations continued, but the energy had shifted. People had seen a moment of real accountability, and it wasn't something they would forget soon. As the first dish arrived at their table, the owner glanced at his wife, watching as she sighed in relief, finally able to rest. He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'll never let something like this happen again." She smiled, squeezing his hand back. "I know." And with that, the night moved forward. The restaurant would continue, lessons would be learned, and from that moment on, kindness wouldn't just be a policy, it would be a promise.